Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, we discuss my thoughts on Season 2, Episode 4 of the Orville, entitled Nothing Left on Earth Excepting Fishes. And I gotta say, from right out of the gate, I was aware of the title of this episode ahead of time, and it was actually really perplexing to me, because as it happens, I've never seen The King and I. And I'm sort of grateful that they gave a tip of the hat, a little nod of acknowledgement to where that came from in the early part of the episode, in the episode's opening, because otherwise I would have had no frame of reference at all whatsoever, never having seen that particular film. And I remember thinking, like, you know, this is such a interesting title that it has to be a reference to something, right? You know, and I'm thinking, oh, maybe it's even a Star Trek reference, because there's so much of The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and Voyager that I haven't actually seen. I've seen, you know, lots of it, but there's still a lot that I haven't gotten around to seeing. And so I was like, no, that would probably be, because this is such a Star Trek-like show, it might be a little too on the nose for that to be the case. You know, and I just thought it was a really intriguing title, and I suspected it was a reference to something, and I'm glad they got that out of the way right away, especially with the sort of ambassadorial political, you know, sort of connotations that it played in to this particular episode between, you know, the human side, in a sense, and the Krill side and everything like that. And that's something else I really appreciated about this episode, was there was so much speculation, because the actress who played Janelle had also played the Krill teacher in Season 1, that she was probably going to be like a sleeper agent and seeking revenge against Ed Mercer, and that played out to be true, and I'm glad they kind of got it out of the way so early into Season 2. But the only other thing is, I'm still half suspecting the guy that Kelly is, you know, hooked up with now, the teacher. I'm suspecting he's one too. You know, that might be like a later revelation to come. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe I'm completely off base on that. But I'm just really glad that they didn't sort of coast the story along unnecessarily. You know, they got it out of the way pretty early on. It's only the 4th episode into Season 2, technically the 3rd, because, of course, the 2nd episode of the season was the carryover from Season 1. And so that's it. It's done. Now it's kind of intriguing to me, because that whole speculation, that whole line of speculation about the Janelle character being potentially a Krill in disguise, that seemed to have, like, my mind percolating, like thinking it was going to be a season-long arc or something like that. Now that that is out the window, effectively, everything's up in the air. I have absolutely no speculations as to where Season 2 is going to go from here. I really have no idea. And but this whole episode, I found it a little slow going, but I really enjoyed it for a lack of too much contemporary comedy. There were some contemporary references, mostly revolving around Billy Joel music, and as much as I am a fan of Billy Joel, that did kind of take me out of it a little bit. It's still that same old complaint that I had carried over from Season 1, the contemporary comedy, contemporary references. If this is supposed to be 400 years into the future, it doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense to me that any of these human beings would be aware of any of this stuff that we contemporarily understand and are familiar with. And I mean, even now, even as I speak, there are generations alive today that came after me who are going to be like, Billy who? You know, they're not going to know who Billy Joel is. So it's just an interesting sort of dichotomy in this you know, sci-fi dramedy kind of series, where they have these contemporary references and little nods and things like that. And I like that thus far in Season 2, it's been more sparing. I definitely felt it was a little more over the top, a little more overt in Season 1. And those were a lot of my complaints with the, you know, the season, the episodes in Season 1, because a lot of the time those little references and nods would take me effectively out of the drama of the episode, or whatever the story happened to be, whether it was a drama, you know, more comedic beats and things like that. And the comedy, sometimes I would even laugh in spite of myself, even though I'd be, you know, sort of shaking my head no, and like, oh, why did they do that? It would still get a perverse sort of chuckle out of me. But thus far, I feel like Season 2 is much more streamlined and much more dramatic. There's a bigger emphasis on the dramatic storytelling, which is something I championed in, you know, Season 1. And I kind of said, as like a template, you know, I would probably enjoy this show even that much more if there was a more straight-laced, dramatic sort of appeal in the storytelling, and how, each episode unfolded. And so the fact that we're having a little bit more of that is definitely a plus for me. And like I say, because they got that whole Janelle being a Krill agent undercover and seeking revenge, because they got that out of the way right away, it's like now the whole rest of season 2 is open wide for potential, and I'm going to be very curious to see where it's all going to go. As far as this episode goes, it also reminded me of Star Trek quite a bit. I mean, the Orville is kind of a Star Trek homage series anyway. It goes without saying, but there are always specific moments, kind of like when I'm watching modern Doctor Who. I am reminded of certain elements from the classic series of Doctor Who, and I always talk about that in videos. The first thing that came to mind in this episode was when, of course, Ed and Janelle decide to go on their little vacation after kind of letting their relationship become public and everything like that. When they first encounter those 3 sort of Krill scout vessels, and they fly by, and then they turn around, they come back, and they're venting drive plasma to try to effectively smoke out the little shuttle that Ed and Janelle are on. It reminded me a lot the way they composed those particular scenes of the Tholian web from Star Trek, the original series, where the Tholians were trying to encase the Enterprise and things of that nature. Just the visuals there, even though it was like a smoke screen rather than sort of a net or a web, as it was called, referred to, via the title of the original series episode, just it really called that back to me immediately. And it kind of served a similar purpose in that, it was trying to trap, for all intents and purposes, the hero vessel, that kind of thing. And then the whole rest of the plot, at least the A plot of the episode, the fact that, Ed and Janelle were trapped on this planet, having not necessarily kind of sort of crashed, but, they were stranded there. They had to get to a high mountain peak to get a distress call out, out through the atmosphere of this planet they were on. It reminded me heavily of the Deep Space Nine episode, The Ascent, which, revolved around Quark and Odo being stranded on a planet after, being on their way somewhere. And basically, it was kind of that same theme. We've seen this before in Star Trek, even when the respective characters who are in focus didn't necessarily crash on a planet. We have seen characters stranded on a planet, and it's usually this great dramatic dichotomy because they don't see eye to eye or they can't communicate. I was also thinking of 2 episodes from Star Trek Enterprise. One was Precious Cargo and the other was Dawn. I think they were both respectively in season 2, just a couple of episodes apart from each other, where you had Trip Tucker, the engineer on the NX-01 Enterprise. In the one episode, he's stranded on a planet with an alien woman who he ends up kind of hooking up with. And then in another episode, he's stranded on another planet with this alien who's trying to basically hunt him down and kill him. And they kind of have to make amends and try to get along so they'll survive. And very similarly to this episode, where Janelle, being in her Krill guise, affected so poorly by the sunlight, by light in general. And there was kind of a similar aspect to, that Dawn episode of Enterprise, where this alien who was hunting Trip, there was a lack of communication between them, but the sunlight and the heat, it was threatening to potentially kill them both if they didn't get rescued in time. So that was heavily drawn to mind watching this episode. And it even kind of reminded me, even though it was kind of a different game altogether, it wasn't about 2 characters being stranded on a planet necessarily, but just the bounding back and forth between Picard and the character in the Darmok episode of The Next Generation, which is an all-time classic, one that is oft quoted. Again, just being in that sort of environment, alone on a planet and wanting to try to figure out some level of diplomacy, some level of communication between them, and having a hard time of it. It's that kind of aesthetic. It's that same dramatic story aesthetic. And that's, brings me to the thing that I liked the best about this particular episode was its ending. The diplomatic route that Ed Mercer took, letting Janelle call her people, in spite of the fact that she had infiltrated, this whole galactic union, if you will, and impersonated a human being and impersonated this particular employee as a, dark matter cartographer and all this kind of stuff, just to get in close and get her revenge on Ed. In spite of all of that, he went against the Admiralty's call and he let her go in the hopes of forging some kind of diplomacy between their respective peoples. and even between them both as individuals. And you know, because of all the time they spent together, they're canoodling, as he says, and getting very intimate, to the point where she knows that if he lays on his back, he'll snore and it'll keep her up all night, you know. There was some really good, subtle elements to just the human condition, and identifying with somebody who is utmost different to you, you know, maybe different beliefs, and whether religious or otherwise, and just you know, different sort of outlook on life, and the differences between all of us. I mean, it's kind of like, again, to call back upon Star Trek, the Vulcan idiom about, you know, infinite diversity and infinite combinations. Here Ed is trying really to forge some kind of bond, a bond that was built on falsity, on a lack of, you know, real legitimate foundation, but he still has some level of faith in it, and he still seems to see that hope, as he says in the end. We're foolish human beings, we're imperfect human beings, we hold out hope, and we hold on to hope. And even in our, you know, worst hour, we still see that there are better times ahead if we aspire and we try harder, you know. And I mean, it's really, there have been times throughout the course of season 1 of this show, and this is really the first time in the second season, but it's really one of the first times overall that I was really wholeheartedly impressed and felt a very Star Trek-like aesthetic in the characterization of Ed in that moment. To take that diplomatic olive branch and extend it, and put that idea out there. You know, there isn't a whole lot of that in television anymore. It's go to war with your enemy. If you do not agree, you know, raise a flag, raise those pitchforks and torches, and we're seeing that a lot in the socio-political climate of the day. And so to have a series, I mean, you know, this is why people were clamoring so much for the Orville's first season, because it's the first level of you know, an entertainment program in a long time that has championed those aesthetics, those ideas, and put that forth. And I just really had a high level of respect all of a sudden in that moment when I realized that's the way Ed decided to play this. Rather than criminalizing and persecuting this alien woman, you know, I mean, it was kind of like the Gorn episode, Arena, from the original series, where once Captain Kirk realizes, oh, we tread upon the Gorn's land. The Gorn were only striking back. They weren't attacking us. They weren't trying to commit genocide against us. We inadvertently, you know, walked onto their territory, tried to claim it for our own, and they were defending themselves. And when you have a greater perspective, when you have an open mind to be open enough to understand that perspective, sometimes by looking at the bigger picture, you can be more diplomatic and understanding, even amongst such tremendous divides and differences between people and beings. In this case, in this series, between species. And so for that, I really applaud it. I really enjoyed it. And even though aspects of the episode were a little slow going, I mean, the whole aspect with Gordon in the B plot, trying to, you know, study for the command track and everything like that, I don't know if that's actually going to go anywhere. My hope would be that this isn't just a one-time thing, a one-episode theme, and they'll forget about it and never reference it again. I'm kind of highly hoping that Gordon has had his eyes opened, and maybe whereas it was first something he even considered because he wants to hook up with women, you know, be impressive and things like that, be seen as an impressive guy, machismo and all that kind of stuff. I actually kind of hope that they play upon that again. And then, of course, his whole being in the simulator, it reminded me, of course, of the Kobayashi Maru, where Captain Kirk kind of sort of, according to the movies in any case, cheated to take the win in a no-win scenario. And, of course, that was referenced in the 2009 Star Trek reboot sort of movie as well, with Chris Pine's Kirk. And, you know, it was pretty much satisfying in the end, singularly because of how it ended with that diplomatic olive branch, as I say, being extended by Ed. And so, yeah, it wasn't necessarily the best episode of the show I've ever seen, but it was definitely a really good one. And it harkened back, to my mind, proper TNG-like Star Trek, you know, that kind of thing. People have been saying that all along, that that's what this series embodies for them. And I've never really gotten there fully because of the contemporary comedy and references. This is the first episode out and out that really felt like a proper TNG kind of episode. And so I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below. If you've seen episode 4 of season 2 of the Orville, Nothing Left on Earth Excepting Fishes, what you thought of it, love it or hate it, anything goes in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, I'd like to ask if you would have a look at my PayPal contribution link to support my channel and my efforts on YouTube. It's a direct line to me with options very similar to Patreon. You can look into setting up a monthly contribution, a one-time only kind of thing. You can send me personal messages alongside a contribution, requesting topics I may discuss in the future, ask for shout-outs, make recommendations of things I might check out in the future, and anything you saw fit to send my way would be 2 thumbs up for me and very much appreciated, securing my longevity on YouTube. And so yeah, otherwise that'll be pretty much it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.